Hello everyone, my name is Landon and welcome back to another video. Today, as voted on by you guys in the poll that I posted a couple of days ago, today I am going to be looking at my top 5 books that I did not finish. Now, my criteria for books is usually, I'll give it about 50 to 100 pages until I realize I don't want to read it. And the thing is I try my best to read every single book that I've picked up, and usually I succeed, but I did manage to compile a list of books that I have not finished. I think I've only ever done it with like 6 or 7 books, and today I brought up the 5 that were like the most prominent that I didn't finish. Yeah, I really do try my best to get through every single book, but these were the 5 that immediately came to mind where I was like, I didn't finish that, and there were reasons why I didn't finish that book. Usually I give it about 50 to 100 pages for a book. 100 usually if it's longer, like if it like reaches 600, 700 pages, I'll give it 100 pages because I know there's a lot of more build up there. But for shorter books, I usually give it about 50 pages until I give up on the thing. And I did pull 5 books that I didn't finish. And this might not be as long of a video because I just don't have that much to say about these books because I only got 50 to 100 pages into them, except for the number 5 spot, which is at the number 5 spot for a reason. I actually got pretty deep into the number 5 spot before I ended up stopping. So let's get into it. At the number 5 spot, we have The Abominable by Dan Simmons. Now, the funny thing about Dan Simmons is that he has written my favorite book of all time, The Terror. That book was a book that was chock full of detail, that was so interesting to read. Every detail in that book, every single thing mattered, and the characters were likable. The villains were so hateable, but also likable because they were hateable. Everything mattered in that book. The Abominable was completely different. Everything in The Abominable was so tedious, nothing mattered, and the ending was atrocious. And I say the ending was atrocious is because I did look up the ending after I stopped reading it. I got about 250, I want to say, pages into The Abominable before I gave up because I was just so incredibly bored by the detail that I knew didn't matter. You can tell when you read a book if detail matters or not. This book had no detail that mattered. It was just filled with just climbing material detail and stuff like that, and I really didn't care for the characters' motives that much, and so I just put it down. I stopped reading it, and I looked up the ending, and the ending wasn't worth it whatsoever. I'm not going to spoil it here for you, but I did end up watching a video from a friend of mine, Church of the Chair. Go check them out. They're a really great channel. I watched their Abominable review a few years back when I tried reading the book for the first time, and I hated the ending, and that just made me hate the book even more. Like, it's funny how Dan Simmons has the double entendre of, yes, he wrote an incredible novel in The Terror, my favorite of all time, but then he also wrote something as horrible as The Abominable. It shows that he's got an interesting range when it comes to books, but not everyone's perfect. But, The Abominable, I would say, is the only book that I really did try my best to finish on this list. That can't be said for much of the other books on this list, so... At the number 4 spot, we have Lolita. And sorry, I don't have visuals of the books here. I don't currently have the books with me. They're on shelves that are on in different locations. But number 4 is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Now, I am one for giving a book a chance, even if the content and the material in a book is like shoddy or can be seen as not okay or weird or something along those lines. Like, I read a lot of Murakami, because he is a Japanese writer, and they kind of like, a lot of his material can be seen as weird for some American readers, and some like material could be hard to get through because like they're not used to like that kind of material over here. But over Murakami is much more like uncensored, I guess that'd be a word you could use. But Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov was just not a book that I vibed with at all. I hated the content in it. Like, the content was just way too much for me, and that says a lot because I'm one to give books a chance even based on their content. But the plot of the book of an older man falling in love with a much younger girl, I just didn't really enjoy. So I just stopped after I got partway through, probably like 70 to 75 pages. And it's funny because I have read Vladimir Nabokov in the past. I read the poem Pale Fire, and I read Invitation to a Beheading, which was also very interesting and a very weird book to read. But Lolita was just one I couldn't get through based on the material and the content that was within the book. Like, I just had to stop myself. And maybe one day I'll go back to it and give it more of a chance, but I just couldn't force myself to read the rest of that book. And at the number 3 spot is a book that I recently didn't finish, and was one of the reasons why I came up with the idea for this video in the first place, was As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. And let me tell you, that book, maybe some of you guys have read it, leave a comment down below if you have gotten through that book. I didn't get through that book. As I Lay Dying was one of the most boring and one of the most tedious isn't even the word for it. There was so much repetition in detail in the first 60 pages that I just gave up. I was like, it's only a 300-page book, or around there, maybe even less than that. I don't remember, like maybe 250 pages, but like I just couldn't care less about what the characters were doing. None of the characters were written well or interesting at all, and the motives for all the characters and what was happening to them, it wasn't written well, and it was all repetitive. And I had heard so many great things about William Faulkner, and even like my sister was like, why did you start with that book by him? That is his worst book by far. And I said, oh yeah, I get it. And then she kind of explained to me what the rest of the book was about, because she did read and finish it when she was in high school, so she had to. But I just couldn't get along with the characters. It was so boring. Everything, I felt like I read there were many sentences in many of the chapters where I felt like I had just read it. Like I had to look back. I was like, did I just read that? Like I felt like I literally just lived through that exact sentence. You're telling me the same thing over and over again, and I feel like you're doing that just to pan out your page length. So yeah, I didn't finish As I Lay Dying, and I realized when my sister told me the rest of the plot, I just really couldn't care less. Like the metaphor for what was going on was fine. Like the symbolism for what was happening in the book was, like, I guess somewhat interesting, but it just wasn't worth my time for how boring and how I was falling asleep at the chapters, and the chapters weren't that long. So that's As I Lay Dying. At the number 2 spot, we have Verity by Colleen Hoover. Now, I work in a bookstore. We sell an egregious amount of Colleen Hoover books, and she writes mostly in romance, but she did write one book in the mystery thriller-ish genre, and it was called Verity. So, and I heard good things about it, but I only hear good things about Colleen Hoover, and it's mostly from women who just love the romance genre in general, and like they don't really care about the writing in it, and they just eat it up for what it is, and I understand that. But I picked up Verity, and I got it. I get a discount at the bookstore that I work at. I work at Barnes & Noble, so I was like, I may as well just try it. It's like $8. I got 50 pages into it, and I couldn't with the writing style of Colleen Hoover. It was so basic. I felt like I was reading a third grader's work trying to write a mystery thriller. Like, it was so basic. The detailing of everything was so basic. It was like 101 mystery thriller writing. And I understand that a lot of people enjoy that kind of writing. They like simplicity, and they like it, just you can just eat it up and go along with it. But I wanted more from it. Like, everything was so bland, and the characters were bland, the story was so basic, and that was just like I just put it down after 60 or so pages. I read the 60 pages in one night, and that just goes to show how easy it is to get through. I got about 60 pages in, and I was like, I just don't really feel like reading the rest of this. Like, I now understand why everyone in the bookstore I work with, all my coworkers, are like, this is why we don't read her work. Even people, like, I had one coworker who was a big fan of romance, loves romance, everything about it, and they couldn't even read Colleen Hoover because of how basic it was. And now I understand that reasoning for around Colleen Hoover's writing. The characters, bland, the writing, bland, everything about it was just so boring and so simplistic. Like, I just couldn't get with it. Immediately after that, I think I read The Alienist by Caleb Carr, and that was very refreshing. The Alienist was a great book. Maybe one day in the future I'll review that one, because that was a great read. Anyways, that's not why we're here. But at the number 1 spot, when I was making this list, I for sure knew that this was the book that was going to be at the number 1 spot. And it is, I believe it was called Assassin's Apprentice. I believe that was the first book in the series. That's what I read. I barely even remember that was the title. I believe it was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, I believe her name is. Robin Hobb. So yeah, I started reading Assassin's Apprentice about last July. I had gotten about 50 pages into it, and it's like a 700 page or so, maybe 600 pages in the format that I had it, fantasy novel. And fantasy novels, I always give time. I wait until characters are built up and, you know, because like world needs to be built. Like good world building needs to be built, especially in the first novel of a fantasy series. So I respected that. I got 50 pages in, and we had met the main character and kind of learned about his life at first, and it was like, okay, all right, yep, so he's going to be our main character going forward for the rest of the book. And like we learned about his childhood and stuff like that, and I was like, all right, we're going forward with this. 50 pages in or so. And then I read the next 50 pages, and that was when I gave up, because it was the same thing for the next 50 pages as well. It was literally one character. The world building was okay, but it could have been done much better. It was basically just this one character. It was like a day in the life of this one character for the first 100 pages of the book. And I had kind of skimmed ahead through the next chapters after I'd gone around 100 pages in, and it just kept going. And I was like, are we gonna get to like him becoming an assassin soon? like it was literally just a day in the life of, I can't even remember his name because I gave up on the book, and I haven't read it in a year, or what I did read I haven't read in a year. And I had looked up reviews online after I stopped reading it, and everyone was in agreement on like Goodreads and Reddit and stuff like that. Like, yeah, a lot of the first book was just a day in the life of this character, and it takes literally until the end of the book, like the last 100 pages of the 600-page book, until the action starts kicking off. So I was like, I don't really want to get there. I kind of enjoyed his backstory a little bit, but not enough to wait that many pages until something actually happens. So Assassin's Apprentice for sure was the book that was going to be number one on this list, because I gave up on that 100 pages in. I thought it was going to get better. I always wait for fantasy books until the world building is done for something to happen. But if a book takes that long to happen, and I know it's a longer series, Assassin's Apprentice, it has like 6 books in the series, I think. So maybe later on there's more action and there's more character involvement and stuff like that, but I just really didn't care about the main character for the first 100 pages enough to just read about his life up until he became an assassin. So, yeah. So that is my list of my top 5 books that I haven't finished. It was pretty difficult to come up with a list because I have read 98% of the books that I have picked up and read. Like, I have gotten through 98% of them. There's a very small percentage, and those 5 are most. I think maybe there's only 2 more books that I could name. So yeah, that's my list for my top 5 books that I have not finished, or DNF'd as we call it in the community. So let me know what you guys thought, and what books you guys haven't finished in the comments below. Leave a like, subscribe, hit the bell icon if you're new. Next week I'll have another poll for you guys telling me which video I should come out next, and I'll see you guys in the next one.